how you work today. What is the invention that has had the biggest impact on how you work? Maybe you thought about computers or smartphones, or perhaps assembly lines or electricity. Maybe you already work closely with artificial intelligence or robotics. But I'll bet there's one invention you didn't think of that affects how almost all of us work, and yet we take it so much for granted that we've forgotten that we invented it. The weekend. Do you know when the weekend was invented? Would you have guessed that it was less than 100 years ago? Imagine if your boss decided to give you one extra paid day off every week. It sounds unbelievable, but that's exactly what happened in 1926 when Henry Ford, the famous car maker, decided that the regular 6-day working week no longer made sense for how his company worked. The time it took to make a Model T car had dropped from 12.5 hours down to 1.5 hours. Ford worried that his workers were becoming exhausted working long hours and didn't have enough time or energy left to buy and use his cars. He did research in his own factories and found that workers were more productive and less likely to quit when they were well rested and had enough leisure time. So he gave everybody Saturdays off at full pay and became the first major company to create the 2-day weekend and the 5-day work week. In 2 years, the company's profits doubled, and his competitors were shocked into doing the same to compete for talent and public opinion. Workers had been fighting since the mid-1800s to reduce the workday from 16 hours a day down to 12, down to 10. And finally, in 1919, the 8-hour working day became an international standard. But most people still worked 6 days a week. The 5-day work week was the next frontier. Nobody expected that the next big step forward would be taken by a factory owner. But when Ford created the 5-day work week in 1926, he was 15 years ahead of the laws that were eventually passed in the US and European countries starting in 1940, which made the 5-day, 40-hour work week a new normal. Notice the dates: an 8-hour working day in 1919 after the Great War and another global pandemic of influenza. The 5-day working week in 1940 after nearly 10 years of the Great Depression. Sometimes a crisis can bring about change that decades of activism alone could not. We have now had a 5-day working week for more than 80 years. Just think for a moment, what has changed since then? Do you still do the same kinds of jobs as your parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents? Do men and women still play the same roles in work and family life that they did in 1940? Today, we have other inventions that Henry Ford couldn't have dreamed of, that have fundamentally changed how, when, and where we work. Yet, the flexibility offered by our mobile devices comes with a hidden cost in unmeasured, unpaid, mental working time. Think about dinner time after a typical workday, when your partner or your kids or your best friends are telling you about their day. How often does it happen to you that your mind wanders to the email that you sent just before walking in the door, to the message from a colleague that pinged during the meal, or to the conference call that you're going to join just this once after the kids are in bed? It definitely happens to me more often than I'd like to admit. It means that we haven't really stopped working, even if we don't have a phone or a computer in our hands. If you calculated the number of hours that you spend thinking about work on top of the number of hours you spend doing the work, it would surely exceed 40 hours. Companies today want us to be more creative, collaborative, and resilient than ever before. The work itself is constantly changing. 40% of what we do in our jobs today is expected to change in the next 5 years. Half of us will need to learn entirely new skills. Do we really think that the old model of 5 days of back-to-back working time with mental work added on top in the evenings, and the greater expectations of the roles that men and women will play in family life, can really achieve this result. It's in the interests of workers, companies, and societies to create the space for a culture of lifelong learning to emerge. So maybe it's time to get rid of the old idea of the 5-day work week and the 2-day weekend. What if the time has come for a new kind of day that is neither weekday nor weekend? A day whose purpose is to spend re-energizing for ourselves, our families, and our communities, not just our employers. A day that is hiding in plain sight. Wednesday. Taking Wednesdays off would give us a weekend, a day in the middle of the week to re-energize or reskill, and a productivity boost to finish off the work week. I discovered the power of Wednesday 6 years ago when I stopped going to work on Wednesdays. Thanks to this break in the middle of every week, I could be more focused and productive at work on Thursdays and Fridays. My husband and my kids could have my full attention at dinner time, at least one extra night per week. I even managed to do a part-time master's degree in a totally new topic that I was passionate about. Ironically, I was able to achieve more than ever at work, despite being there 20% less. Yet I took a pay cut in order to liberate my Wednesdays. I hadn't dreamed that someday a full paid 4-day work week could be possible. But now, something amazing has started to happen. Companies around the world are testing out a new idea: the full paid 4-day, 32-hour work week. Like Henry Ford, employers are discovering that productivity goes way up by around 40% when they give more paid free time back to workers. When time becomes a resource that's controlled by the employee and not the manager, it's amazing how much can get done. Rather than squeezing more hours into every day, teams figure out how to work together more efficiently. They shorten meetings, they send fewer emails, and they spend less work time on social media and personal errands. When work no longer steals time from our personal lives, we don't have to steal personal time from work. Sales, revenue, and profitability go up because people are more engaged and committed to their work and to their companies. You don't have to wait until HR agrees to give you Wednesdays off. You can start now to try making Wednesdays different. Email and long meetings are notoriously bad for our energy, so block your calendar on Wednesdays and don't check your inbox. Reserve time for learning. You could read more about the research on the 4-day work week, take an online course, or start a new project. Create the boundaries in order to give your full attention to the people who matter most, big or small. We as a society invented the weekend and the 5-day work week when our technology enabled us to jump to the next level of productivity. The 4-day work week makes sense for the technology we live with today. Making the 4-day work week a successful reality will require boldness from companies, creativity from workers, and supportive policies from governments to ensure that it doesn't become a special privilege for a limited few. We are in the middle of the most disruptive economic scenario in a generation. Too many lives and livelihoods have been lost or put on hold. The 4-day work week alone cannot solve all the problems we face in our economies and societies. But when the world does get back on track, let's be ready with a new idea to give one day back to people to re-energize and reskill for their sake and the benefit of their companies and communities, whether it's Wednesday or any other day, whatever makes the most sense for the kind of work that you do. Are you ready to live in a world where we talk about balance between work, life, and learning? Where the idea of the 4-day work week is as natural to our grandchildren as the weekend has become for us? What will you do with your Wednesday? Thank you.